So it seems that we've got a slightly unexpected brand new Space Marine model update today, with a new version of the drop pod dropping into battlefields near you sometime soon. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we've got a shiny new model for Games Workshop's favourite faction. It looks like we've got the first reveal for the anticipated wave of Space Marine models coming this year. That's a new version of the classic drop pod, updated and refreshed to Primaris scale, and with a few changes to the kit, including things like being 2 in a box, having some optional debris around it, and losing its gun. This one was maybe a slightly unexpected one to have just come out on a Monday reveal. I feel like in recent times they've usually been keeping that for specialist games with lots of Necromunda reveals coming out on Mondays, but it seems that the Astartes are eating good for this one. It maybe raises the chance that with the next reveal show we might see a bunch more Space Marine models shown off. There's a good chance that the next one will be with the Dallas Open, which will be round about in a month or so's time. A Space Marine release wave I think is fairly well expected for this year. It's been heavily teased with a bunch of Astartes things coming up in their roadmap, and just from the past precedent of 9th edition and 8th edition before it, both of those have come with a regular Codex Space Marine release wave at some point later in the edition. We had quite a big one with the Shadowspear box set and follow-up releases around that back in 8th edition, and then Strike Force Agastus with the Brutalis Dreadnought, Desolation Marines, and New Lieutenant in 9th. Today though, it seems like it's time for the iconic drop pod to get a resculpt, this one's being a very long-standing and storied bit of Space Marine lore, the way that they might often be deployed to the fight in the spear tip of planetary assaults, essentially great big metal capsules fired at a planet from the side of a battle barge, screaming through the atmosphere at breakneck speeds, then powerful thrusters kick in just before making landfall, slowing it down enough so that the Space Marine occupants can at least survive the drop. Though even with these thrusters on board, there'd be a good chance that any normal human occupants wouldn't be able to survive just with the G-forces. It's common for the Space Marines to hold prayers or battle rituals on the way down. Then the impact hits, the doors spring open, and the Astartes jump out into the fight, setting about the foe with bolter and chainsword, and potentially even the impact of the pod itself could cause some damage, with the potential to crush whatever luckless traitors or Xenos were beneath it. The current model for the drop pod has been around at least a fair while at this point. I'd say as Warhammer 40k kits go, it was definitely one of the lesser loved ones, maybe frequently coming up if you were talking about Games Workshop model kits that weren't really the best quality or the best build experience. Basically with their 5-sided design, with things all going together kind of symmetrically, it was kind of hard to assemble without leaving some gaps, particularly if you were trying to assemble it in such a way that you could have the doors open and close on their hinges. There's a good chance that the hinges might not have enough friction so could fall open super easily as well, unless you use something like magnets or blue tack. On top of that, they're fairly labour intensive to paint as well. Lots of surfaces, both on the insides and the outsides of them. I certainly sank a whole ton of hours into a drop pod for my Space Marines myself, and never wound up finishing on it. Probably if you do want to paint these up, it might be worth compromising on quality a little bit, as they do feel like a bit more of a backdrop model as opposed to a centrepiece. In any case, really not too surprised to see it redone, with them being a core part of Space Marine lore since the early days of 40k. This really did feel one that was scaled for Firstborn, but was far too iconic to be removed and would just be updated to Primaris scale at some point. It was probably going to happen sooner or later, like a few of the other Space Marine kits that you could name, and it turns out that it's sooner. Seems that the current model on the Games Workshop web store has been marked temporarily out of stock in the UK, EU and US. It does mean that if you're desperate for the current model, it might well be worth seeking them out now, as supplies from discounters and places might well dry up quite quickly, at least with a bit of time with the model no longer being on sale. Focusing on the new miniature though, you get 2 of these in a box set, and broadly the look and feel of the thing is pretty well the same, but they have made a few different changes worth talking about and a few different design decisions. From their article it sounds like there's no longer an option for you to assemble the doors all closed in and assembled up anymore, you just have to assemble them down, which I guess maybe feels like a bit of a downgrade, but feels like if you had to go for one or the other it would make sense to go for that, given that when you put them on the board you imagine that the drop pods just descended and made impact, and the doors immediately open to deploy their Space Marines, so that's how you'd expect to see them once they're made impact. Will be interesting to see what's on the bottom side of those doors, whether it's just flat against the ground or something, or whether they do have details on them. I feel like for modelling and hobbying purposes it might be nice if they had some details on the back sides of them, even if the idea for using them in game is that you have the flaps down. They've apparently removed the option of the Stormbolter and Deathwind missile launcher, the little gun that they could do some maybe slightly meaningless chip damage, but occasionally it was kind of fun if they could just plink a random infantry model, and maybe a bit of an ignoble end for the enemies of the Emperor being shot down by a drop pod auto system. Again, maybe feels like it removes a tiny bit of fun factor there, but on the other hand I'm not sure it's a terrible decision to focus on making transports do transport things. They certainly have been kind of keen to cover Primaris models in a massive amount of extra guns every time they've released them so far. Otherwise, style-wise, it looks like the straps that hold the Space Marines are a bit more pinned back. so there's not quite so much complexity going on inside the hold, and maybe that makes the feel of the hold inside it look a little bit more chunky. I don't know if that's part of trying to scale it to be a bit more appropriate for Primaris than Firstborn. It sounds like at least some of those changes have been made to make the kit easier to build. Games Workshop said that it should be far easier to assemble than the previous one, and that was definitely a criticism that was levelled at the other one, so it might not be the worst move in the world. I guess at the expense of it not having options with things like the guns and being able to assemble the flaps up and down. I'm sure some will see that as a downgrade. I'm not sure it's the biggest deal for drop pods though, given their role as essentially just being a backdrop for Space Marines to get into battle for in terms of miniatures. I think what is a good decision though is the option that you do have is to use the debris under the doors or not. Basically there's a bunch of stones and rubble there where the drop pods made some impact. It looks like you've got the aesthetic option to assemble it either on or off the miniature. I think for me personally, I'd probably be a bit more tempted to leave it off. Might just look a bit weird if you painted it very different to how the table you've set it up on looks. Here's a couple more pictures of the miniature. As ever, the drop pod's got a pretty enormous footprint in game, and that seems to be extended even further by the terrain pits if you put them on. I'd guess if they're optional and modular though, they probably won't count in terms of the model's footprint rules-wise. It could make it physically harder to set up in certain places though, I suppose. There's also a close-up of where the Space Marines sit in the drop pod, 2 per window as before. So again, it looks like you'll be able to deploy a squad of 10 Space Marines with it, and not more than that. Side by side, it hasn't really changed so much in appearance otherwise with the old one. That seems fair enough in my opinion. It's got an iconic look that doesn't really need messing with too much. It's not supposed to be a big centerpiece model, so a simple design that doesn't need to be messed with. One other interesting thing that they mentioned though was that you'd be getting 2 of them in a box rather than 1, which going by Games Workshop standard for these sort of kits probably means it's going to be a cheaper miniature than if you bought them separately. The current one's priced at £34 or $58. Perhaps if they go for something like the Necron Convergence of Dominion as a similar sort of miniature feel, that might be around about the £42 or $65 sort of mark. If I had to guess though, I'd probably suspect that it might be a bit more than that, maybe somewhere around the sort of £50, $75 to $80 sort of thing if I'd had to guess at this point. I guess it does mean that there'd be no option just to buy one of them on its own though, unless you went via eBay or something, if you literally just wanted one Primaris scale drop pod for your army and not more. Rules-wise, this is the current drop pod datasheet, currently 70 points, and is a non-dedicated transport vehicle. You set it up in reserve, and it basically gives you a squad of power armoured marines the option to deep strike them, and with its special rule, you can deep strike them on turn 1 as well. Basically that's quite good for ranged units that both want to get the alpha strike on the enemy and get close ideally. Means they should have at least a fairly guaranteed first wave of firepower without taking damage, though at a big points premium. When the drop pod's down itself, it has OC2, so it can actually chip in to holding objectives or even doing actions. Has alright durability for its cost in its own right, so it could be annoying to try and take down when there's probably loads of things that are higher priorities than it. As mentioned, can chip away with a tiny bit of small arms fire with a Death Wind or Stormbolter. It is a bit of a weird model in that you can choose to assemble it. The footprint of it has often caused some slight rules weirdness in the past. Basically a 40k model that, depending on how you assemble it, could have a vastly bigger or smaller footprint. Though usually Games Workshops tended to go with some sort of variant rule of just either keep the doors up or put them down as you like, but then once it's down on the battlefield you can't change it around. In game at the moment, currently it's not all that strong really. It's kind of rare to see drop pods in competitive lists. Feels like it's not really all that far from being really quite usable, but just a few points too many. The things that you most want to use it for will be ranged units getting the jump on enemy units and potentially doing so right from turn 1. Maybe some combos that might like it could be a squad of Infernus Marines with Vulcan Hestarn elsewhere on the board to provide his buff to them. Both Devastators and Hellblasters have enough threat to justify a drop pod to get where they want to be. Maybe the Hellblasters could take a Lieutenant at the expense of dropping one of their models. And another option could be Librarius Fusillade Stern Guards to get a fairly guaranteed alpha strike on the foe, though again you'd have to drop one model and not take a heavy bolter. Generally though, for more competitive play, if you're trying to build a strong list, people tend to go for other options for the most part. If you want to deliver some ranged Space Marine infantry, some detachments have ways of doing things. Strategic Reserve is an option, and if you want a transport vehicle to get them close, then the Repulsor often tends to be the go-to. That's quite an efficient datasheet at 180 points, admittedly far pricier than the drop pod, but also has its own good stats, damage defense, and can move around, and its helpful re-embark style special rule. It's definitely not unusable though, particularly in more casual games. They basically get you alpha strikes at a premium, and then have some annoyance factor on objectives. In the article, Games Workshop confirmed it would get a new datasheet as well, and it'll come out as a digital update when the model is released. If we are doing a major Space Marine release wave, it's at least possible they could do a late 10th edition Space Marine Codex as they did back in 8th edition. No hints of that yet so far if they're talking about digital rule set releases. Definitely not impossible though, depending on exactly what we get. At first guess though, I really wouldn't suspect that they make too big sweeping changes to how it functions. It does its job kind of well and does offer a unique thing with first turn deep strike. I guess if they're changing rules to represent the new model, then the gun rules will be taken away, maybe with a Legends datasheet there. I really wouldn't be too surprised to see it lose the OC2 that it has. It's maybe a tiny bit surprising that it has that in the first place, given that it's immobile and doesn't have any crew besides a Machine Spirit bolter. Games Workshop stated that it would clarify where things get measured from. My guess from that is probably that you'd ignore the terrain bits, but the rest of the model would count as its footprint, though I guess we'll wait and see. What I think might be fun if they decided to add some fun factor to it would be some sort of impact damage style rule. When the drop pod comes down, it might be able to cause a bit of damage on outlying enemy units, maybe similar to the Tyranid Morlock, even if it's not necessarily as strong as that. Feels like maybe that could add some fun factor for Thunderous Impact. And I guess another possibility could be some sort of drop close rule, maybe dropping outside of 6 inches or something. That doesn't feel like that'd be the most overpowered on this thing given its enormous footprint and how it's kind of easy to screen. In any case, hopefully they managed to land the rules so it's good but not either overpowered or undertuned. They've definitely managed to get the balance right for drop pods in previous editions before 10th, maybe having them priced so they're justifiable for a central shooting damage combo unit, but not really something that you spam. Hopefully they managed to return it to that with a bit more incentive from a new shiny model, and not have it just completely neglected like the Hammerfall drop bunker. While talking drop pods, maybe worth mentioning that the Chaos Space Marines might quite like one version of their own in a return of the Dreadclaw as well. This was one of the miniatures that they had sent to Legends of the Horus Heresy early in 10th. It would be quite fun to see a plastic kit for them, given there's no reason why they can't have their spiky drop pods to send them into battle. I believe they might have been mentioned in passing as well in that recent campaign book where the Chaos Forces were assaulting the Sanctus Wall. I think it's unlikely we'd get something like a Dreadnought drop pod, where it doesn't look like this one is able to be assembled as that. That's a Forge World one that people have felt is kind of cool for a while. I feel like it's probably a bit too niche for Games Workshop to give it a full model release if they weren't doing it as a multi-build with the standard drop pod. In any case, interesting stuff to see the first Space Marine release. It makes me wonder when we'll see the next one for these. Was it just completely standalone, or are they going to be drip feeding them every second Monday or something? As mentioned, if they're going by their previous edition's form, we should see at least a few more generic Space Marine kits come out. The most obvious of which would be the Assault Terminators and the Vanguard Veterans, though I guess there's every chance they could be saved for 11th edition. There's lots of characters that seem kind of likely that didn't have their rules removed despite being in Finecast resin: Vulcan Hestan, Cato Sicarius, Lysander and Pedro Cantor. And I feel like these are very likely indeed, given that the Codex chapters have been specifically teased, which kind of implies that they're getting specific model releases, unless it's something more surprising like squads for them. And then beyond that, there's all sorts of things they could do: resculpted Land Raiders, various other firstborn tanks, venerable or ironclad versions of the Redemptor, Primaris Super Heavies or Flyers, and lots of fill-in-the-gap style characters with alternative versions for Gravis and bikes. Basically, Games Workshop has more possibilities than they're likely to deliver in terms of Space Marine releases, so it'll be fun to see what we get this time around. As is usually the case, it's probably going to be a good year for the Astartes, some more kits coming this year, and then likely another great big release wave coming for 11th edition, no doubt. In any case, I'll leave that there though. Let me know your thoughts as to the new miniature, and would you be tempted to pick up a pair of Space Marine drop pods or not? Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. Before I go, I'll just give a quick shout out to a shiny new bit of channel merch that's dropped this month as well. A generous friend in the UK reached out and offered to make the channel logo in a shiny pewter badge and keyring. They've come out quite nicely, I think. As custom made metal jewellery goes, it's at least fairly affordable. £7.50 for the keyring or the badge, and that includes shipping within the UK. It's a little bit more overseas, so around about $15 or €13 in the US and EU. I'll leave a link to their Etsy store down in the video description, so feel free to give them a look over if you'd like. They have a bunch of other fun hobby and giftware style things, not really aimed at gaming or tabletop stuff though. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to support and keep the videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages: seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.